Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest Helene Berger, and she's here today to share with us her new book, Choosing Joy. Now, Helene has held major positions of leadership throughout her life and is known as a powerful and inspirational speaker. She was president for the GMJF Women's Department and the president of the Miami Central Agency for Jewish Education. And on the national level, she was the national chair of the Jewish Educational Service of North America, on the Council of Jewish Federations Board and Executive Committee, where she was the national chair of the CJF Women's Department, and for over 30 years on the board of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. So let's welcome to the show, Helene Berger.
Delighted to be with you.
What an honor it is to spend this time with you. And my goodness, your new book, Choosing Joy, I mean, it's touching so many hearts. As an author, you have to be so proud.
It feels mighty good and very unexpected.
Very unexpected. Well, you know, it's sometimes interesting, the journey of becoming an author. Sometimes we don't think that we're going to be one, and then things happen. I'd love for you to share with our listeners your story.
My pleasure. Although it wasn't always a pleasure. Before I even get into the story, I just want to say that life is full of the unexpected. And I think of your words that how a moment can change your life. And how we handle what we're handed, whether something wonderful or something we wouldn't choose, really makes us who we are and makes us live with either contentment or live in turmoil. So my history is this. Just shortly after our 50th anniversary, my husband, Helene Berger, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And we had seen many doctors, many opinions, but finally we got the appointment at the state-of-the-art Wien Center for Memory Disorder. And when Dr. Dwara turned to Adi and said, "How do you feel?" his response was clear, direct, and straightforward. "I don't want to live anymore." And in the course of the first year, he followed the typical Alzheimer's syndromes with frustration, irritability, rigidity, annoyance. Fortunately for me, not violence. But I watched him carefully and started to change not him, but change me and how I was handling it. And within the next year and a half, or certainly two, he became known as the man with the radiant smile. Strangers would stop me and say, "I've never seen your husband without a smile." And I'm going to fast forward really quickly, six years later, 6 years after the diagnosis, to the last night, unexpectedly, of his life. He did not die from Alzheimer's. He was healthy. We took 17 close friends out for dinner as a thank you for their kindness. And he was doing so well at that point, but I purposely didn't tell him who was coming because I didn't want him to feel the burden of having to try to remember. So we went into the restaurant and he greeted every one of those guests by name. And at 6 years after Alzheimer's, and they were astounded. I shouldn't say he sat down. He had fractured a hip 2.5 years before he passed away, and he was in a wheelchair, but he raises his glass, water he never drank, raises his glass to make a toast, and he makes the most profound and articulate toast, thanking our friends for their kindness, for their attention, for their caring, for their taking care of me. And when we left, 2 of our close friends said the same words, "Are you sure he has Alzheimer's?" And so the book is how this extraordinary rare progress came to be.
Well, that's so touching. And it must have been so difficult to hear him say that he didn't want to live anymore.
It was very, very difficult. And, you speak about how a moment can change your life. And that was one of those moments because, we shouldn't be surprised because by the time we go for testing, it's clear that there are symptoms, there are things we're worried about. And we know, but we hope against hope that it's just normal aging. And it isn't until you get those definitive words that it's still a shock. No matter how much you know it, a part of your brain knows it, and the other part is not ready to hear what we have to hear.
Yeah, that can be so difficult.
And by the way, I do want to say this, that when we talk later about the methodology and what we developed together, I feel so strongly that the caveat to all of this is I don't want people to think that I'm saying, well, if you do what we did, if you develop, that life will be easy. It's not. It's tough. And so many deeply, hundreds of thousands of people have given their all, their energy, their time, their patience, their love, and still ended up with a loved one who doesn't know their name, doesn't know their kid's name, and may even become violent and abusive. So nothing that I say that worked for us is any guarantee. Every family and comes with a different history and a different story. And I always want to put that out there because I don't want to come across like a Pollyanna. Oh, you do this and life will be a piece of cake. It's not.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different variables, and you're right. I mean, there are people who act out very violently, and others who just, you've got different people reacting different ways. So there is no, one, kind of get healed quickly, move through this part easily, kind of pill or regimen. It's nice that you guys have, and we'll talk about this in a little bit later, but you've developed a protocol that really kind of helps. But I think it's good to share that, there's so many different things that go on that, this is what worked for you.
You're absolutely correct. And one of the things, even before we get to the specifics, one of the things that people seem to have gotten, and in just the month that the book has been out, is that the things that I discovered that we learned together do not apply just to an Alzheimer's patient, but clearly to any loved one who is declining in any way, whether it's Parkinson's or a bad hip or back or leg. The universal theme of the book is how we respond to the people we care about and how that makes all the difference. And if you'd like a quick example of that.
Sure, I love that.
Well, Alzheimer's patients, as we all know, tend to ask the same question many times. And I think I did what everybody did. I was not skilled in knowing how to handle any of this. I did what we all did the first couple of times. I would answer sweetly and nicely. And by the third or fourth time, it's not that my words changed, but before my answer, I would subconsciously take a sigh, like implying, do I have to say this again, or just raise an eyebrow before speaking? And even though my words were, sweetheart, I'm going to the ballet with Elaine, the nonverbal sign of frustration on my part, I realized was like a punch in the gut. And I remember one night, I vowed, I'm not going to do this anymore to this beautiful man. And it sounds easy. It was not easy. And I remember going to the ballet that night and looking for a blank page on the program to write to write that as a note to myself, and that's how this whole book started, never as a book, but with all my little notes during a concert or program or a doctor's office. And it was one of the hardest things that I had to do, but it was so amazingly effective in that. If it was the 8th time, I would say, "Sweetheart," and usually with a pat on the cheek, "I'm going to the ballet with Helene." He said, "Oh, yes, yes, dear, I remember." So I didn't diminish him by my own frustration, because he had, although his memory was clearly failing at that point, he had a heightened sensitivity to me, to my mood, my frustration, my anxiety. And throughout the book is this theme that how we treat the person we care about affects them profoundly.
That's so true. And it's interesting when you meet this with a great deal of patience and understanding, just how that changes the dynamics.
It 100%, in my opinion, does. And I think one of the things about the book that's unique is that when I found something that worked, like that note I made myself, you're not going to put him down by a sign of frustration. I think what I did, every time I found something that worked, I didn't say, "Oh, if that happens again, I know what to do." I tried to understand what was the underlying philosophy, what was the principle that I could apply to other things. And some examples of that, it was clear before he was diagnosed, it was very clear to me that he should not be driving anymore. He was getting lost, there were a few fender benders, and I took him to a brilliant psychiatrist, to both of us, because I didn't know how to deal. I saw all of these signs and he was not diagnosed yet. And I tipped her off ahead of time that I don't know how to take the car away. I'm scared to death. And in the session when he was there, she said very nonchalantly, very matter-of-factly, "You know, Adi, you're on some new medications now, and it might be a good idea to stop driving for a while until you see how they affect you." Well, he was still rational, and he said, "Oh, okay." Fast forward, about a month later, I overheard him at a concert. I overheard somebody say, "Adi, you driving home?" And he said, "No, I don't drive anymore." And I couldn't believe my good fortune that it didn't have to be a battle. But I went home and wrote, what is the principle? Not now versus never. And I found I applied that to many, 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 many things that we did. But the most important one that I think I wrote and discovered, not early, but was from, we had a housekeeper who had been with us 3 days a week for a few hours a day. And after he fractured his hip, I had no extra help for the first 3.5 years, which by the way was a mistake, because he did much better when I had relief. But I remember, her name is Lisette. She's through the whole book because I learned so much from her. And I remember her walking into the bedroom one morning and saying, if she had said, "Mr. Berger," with a cheery voice, "your breakfast is ready," I would have thought, how lovely. Lisette never did that. She walked into the room and said, "Mr. Berger, are you ready for breakfast?" And I was stunned, because I realized the difference. No matter how cheerfully you say your breakfast is ready, it's an implied command. Your breakfast is ready, you have to come and eat. Whereas the question, it's his choice. And I applied that to every single thing we ever did in the future. I never told, I asked, and because he made the decision, it was his. He owned it, and he wasn't fighting it. And people who are successful, people in any job who do a job well, are are used to being in command of whatever their world is. And when you take a grown man or woman and start telling them what they have to do every minute, of course the frustration piles up, and the resentment and the anger and the opposition. And that was probably one of the biggest things that I learned. Even if instead of 80, we're getting the car to go to the doctor, and you need to go to the bathroom now. It was never that. Do you want to go to the bathroom before we leave, dear? And the friction was gone. He wasn't being told, do you want to watch this movie or that movie or that movie? And so that was a very profound difference in our lives. And each of these things, I didn't know any of this ahead of time, but I observed keenly and changed my behavior in order to help him, and his behavior and his cognition and his brain started functioning in a completely different way than it had.
How beautiful is that? And it's, just the way that anyone would want to be treated. When we look at, telling people what to do versus asking them and getting their input, it lets them feel empowered.
It certainly did. And one of the other things that I'm keenly aware of is that he was a very bright man. And I kept, as time went on, his mind was active every minute of every day. When I said about television before, he had 45 minutes a night, period. No other television during the day. And always with a movie that he selected. We usually took sometimes 3 nights to finish a movie, but I kept coming up with creative ways that I hadn't thought about to engage his mind. When he first fractured his hip, and I couldn't handle it anymore. That's the first time I had aides to come in because I couldn't lift him. I remember getting them going to Costco and getting kids' flashcards with numbers and the answers on the back, and the aides would hold up the cards because he had to take a lot of breathing treatments. He had issues with his lungs. And he was always thought of himself as a mathematician. And they would hold up the cards, and they couldn't get over how fast he was with the answers. And I remember for the first 3 years, he had played the piano beautifully and a big repertoire. And for the first 3 years after he was diagnosed, he never went to the piano. And one day I said, "Sweetie, you got such joy out of the piano. Why aren't you playing?" "I can't." "Why not?" "My fingers don't work anymore." And I said, "Would you do me a favor? Maybe your fingers don't work because you haven't played. Would you give me 10 minutes a day at the piano?" "Sure." Well, within a couple of weeks, he was playing an hour every day, beaming Rachmaninoff and Bach and Mozart and Brahms. And so that was reintroducing something that he already loved and already knew. But there were so many new things that I kept thinking, what can I come up with to keep his mind active and busy? And one night after dinner, I set down a lovely blank pad of paper and markers and crayons and what do you call those things? The different painty things. And he looked at me like I was nuts and said, "What is this?" I said, "Draw something." And he said, "Draw what?" I said, "Whatever makes you happy." And that started the remaining years. Almost every night, he drew pictures that were so not for a museum hardly, but pictures that were so full of joy. And the cover of the book, was one of his drawings, and the word joy. The O is a smiley face. That was one of his drawings. He was so proud of them that he titled he didn't title, he titled very few, but he signed and dated every one. And this one on the book he titled, and in clear writing, Happy Son. So some of the things he came up with, writing me nightly teeny little love notes that are scattered throughout the book, and his drawings are scattered throughout the book. And there are just many graphics that show a man who was certainly not a depressed man. You couldn't draw that way if you were. And some of the things that we came up with, I remember he always loved math. He really wanted to be a math professor. And I thought, Sudoku, it'll be perfect. And in the first 2 years, when I tried it, he totally was confused. He couldn't get where all those little numbers went in those little boxes. And it was frustrating, so we stopped. About 2 years later, I thought, he's doing so well. I'm going to try Sudoku again. And he got it. He did it most nights after dinner. And sometimes it took 2 nights to complete a puzzle, but I think one of the pluses was that he wasn't left alone to do it. I would sit with him and praise him. I never gave him an answer, but he was not alone when he did it. I tried computer games. They did not work at all. He wasn't interested, and I think maybe because that was an alone activity.
Well, you had so many creative ways of approaching this. I'm so grateful that we have your book, Choosing Joy, now, because a lot of people can look at this as kind of a roadmap in how they can deal with their loved ones and how they can empower them.
I certainly hope so. One of the big things is that he was involved in every decision affecting his life, and we were a team. And not that there weren't issues. Trust me, there were plenty. But I would come to him with an open discussion, always letting him know how much I loved him first with a pat or words, and then he was ready to hear it. And what thrilled me is so many of the things we came up with he was a part of the solution, and that was very, very, very important. And so the bottom line for me is that the attitude that we convey to our loved one clearly makes a difference, and the more we can give kindness and patience and loving words and support, it's magical. It definitely makes a difference.
Well, I think this says a lot about your character as an individual as well, to be able to look at your relationship and move, back enough where you're like, I need to be patient. I need to approach this differently. I can't approach it with the same mindset that I have for the years that we've been married.
Thank you so much. That is exactly what happened. Unwittingly, I didn't plan it. I didn't know. Nobody knows how they're going to react and what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's such a difficult time for so many families. What were some of the surprising things that you learned? I mean, I know you've shared quite a bit with us already, but what's something surprising that you learned along this journey?
All of it. Really, every day was a new discovery, a new surprise. But I think, it's a fascinating question. I think one of the things that made a difference is when I spoke to him, it was how. If he did things that were clearly unwanted behaviors, what I learned was like for example, I learned from friends, and then I heard it myself, that he was making this pure, gentle man who never said an off-color word in his life, was making remarks to women that were clearly inappropriate. And when I heard it myself, I blanched. I didn't say a word, but when we came home, I sat him down and I said, "Dear, do you know how much I love you?" And big smile. And then I told him what I heard, And I said, "This is not you." I was honest. I was open with him. And he said, "I'm so sorry. I won't do that anymore." Well, that's lots of luck. And I said, let's not look back. Let's look at the future. What can we come up with? Can we come up with a word that'll be our code, our secret code word, to let you know when your behavior is inappropriate? And he said, "How about inappropriate?" And I was so delighted that he came up with the word himself. But the point I want to make, when you said, what did I learn? When he did it again, and in the beginning he did it many, many times, less and less and less, until finally absolutely stopped. When we were out in public and I used the word, and this is key, and this is what I learned, it was never with gritted teeth, "That's inappropriate, dear," with annoyance. It was always whispering in his ear, "Sweetie, inappropriate." And he would look at me and say, "Thank you, dear." And so it's not just what we do, it's how we say it, how we treat the person with dignity. And these little lessons kept coming. When I paused with the answer, it was because there were so many tumbling forth. Every day was a surprise, and every day I tried to learn from what was set before me.
You gave so much of yourself, and that's what relationships and marriages are about, is giving of oneself to the other. But you did this in such a selfless way. Was there ever a point where you could carve out your own time and have time to fulfill your own needs?
I'm so glad you asked that question. And there's an entire chapter in the book about taking care of yourself. And I cannot say this strongly enough. Nobody can give their all 24 hours a day without declining. And I was very fortunate to continue seeing the doctor that first saved me from the driving experience. And she was so insistent that I take time for myself. And in so many ways. And at first I felt so guilty about it. And she tried to help me get over the guilt. But the amazing result was that I thought, what will my friends think if I go to something without him? And I had all these fears that were totally unnecessary. The amazing thing was that so many people came to me and said, "Helene, you are handling this so well." And they had respect for it rather than criticism for it. And it was very special. Alone time, if it's a walk, it doesn't have to be. And it's another thing is that not everybody can afford to have the help to take the time. And I'm saying to every person I know that it is crucial for your own sanity. It is crucial for your loved one that you take a break, and it doesn't have to be a trained nurse or aide. You can have a high school or college student come and play checkers for a while, or chess, or play cards. You've got to find a way to give yourself a break, whether it's a family member who'll help, or a friend, or just any human being who can be kind and loving. But nobody can survive without time alone. And if they don't have it, they're going to be frustrated and take it out on the patient. So I'm so glad you asked that.
Oh, well, I'm so glad you shared that, because it's so important. I think there's a lot of people when they're going, they have a loved one that's going through a really difficult time, having a medical type of emergency. Taking time to yourself can seem like a selfish thing when you really need to do that.
I agree, totally.
So at what point did you decide it was time to start writing Choosing Joy?
That's very interesting. I almost never decided. I had tons of notes, never for a book, but to myself. By the way, the background is that this is my first book, but I've been speaking and writing for 40 years. So I've been, because I held major national positions, which I don't go into, but it had me speaking around the country. And I started out on little scraps of paper, usually at a concert. He loved music, and we went through all of it, 3 to 4 concerts a week. And I would started out by looking for a little blank page in the concert program so I could write down in case I had a thought. Then I graduated to throwing in my purse one of those little 3x4, whatever, moleskin notebooks in case I had a thought. I wrote only for me so I could remember, so I could remind myself, so I could put in black and white what I had to do. It never occurred to me to write a book. And gradually, towards the end, as his improvement was so obvious to everybody, that so many friends started coming to me and asking, why is, what are you doing? Tell me what's happening. Teach me. And I had this wild idea of, I've got a lot of notes that might be appropriate for a book, and I could really help people, which was my only motivation in doing this thing. I've learned so much from a layperson's perspective, not from a doctor who's giving technical stuff. This was a woman's heart speaking. And when I mentioned it to the psychiatrist that I was still getting help from, she absolutely insisted. And this book took 8 years to come into being. And for most of the years, it was on the back corner of my desk as a thought when I was in the mood or when I had something to write. But she was very persistent. And then I realized that it really could be of value and could be a tremendous help to many, many, many people, no matter what the failing was. And I have to tell you one quick thing. A daughter of my good friend, who's now in her 50s, wrote me a beautiful letter after reading the book, and she ends with, "You have to know how universal this book is. I am speaking to my husband now differently than I ever spoke to him because of reading your book." And that, I think, was the supreme compliment that I've gotten.
Oh. Well, if that's the least that people pick up from your book, I mean, gosh, what a better place this world would be, because there's so much information in here, and being able to talk to one another with, just compassion and understanding, I think is such a big deal.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Helene,
go ahead.
Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community?
Okay, let me just say one last thing, may I, about that what I'm hoping that people have when they read is that, yes, I order suggestions how to cope methodology, but I hope that after reading the book, the reader comes away with the sense that they are not the hapless victims of fate, that our actions can and do make a difference, and that we really can choose to live with hope and, yes, even joy. And you can find the book on Amazon and on a website, which is very simple, www.heleneberger.com. And Helene is spelled with all E's, Helene, and Berger is spelled with all E's, Berger. And there are many, and yours will be on it as soon as it's done. There are many wonderful interviews that I've had on there, and much information. And it's all on the website. There all the wonderful experiences that I've had, and I'm just so beyond delighted at the reception that this book has had, and I hope it helps a lot of people.
Well, I'm sure it will, Helene, and thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
My appreciation to you for having me.
Well, thank you, Helena. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you, and of course to talk about your new book, Choosing Joy. Choosing Joy is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.